No, they voted last night.
Did they? So is that gonna be an April?
My mom.
Sorry, I was, that I wanted to talk to. No, we're just kind of. Exactly. Because what he did was he prepared information for his council saying, in order to not run out of money, don't disrupt the therefore you need to. Like a retro, by he's when can they?
Okay.
And that date is October 23rd. And you can kill this route in October 25. So you will tell them that way Metro Life says such a thing. And when
Hi, Heather. Can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Thank you so much. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes.
Sounds good. Thank you.
But yeah.
All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and convene the meeting and call it to order. Pat will now call the roll.
Good morning, everyone. City of Avondale, Harold Seguina.
Present.
City of Buckeye, Dan Cotterman. City of Chandler, Ryan Peters.
Present.
City of El Mirage, Amber Wakeman. She's on WebEx. Town of Fountain Hills, Dave Trimble.
Here.
Town of Gilbert, Mary Goodman.
Here.
City of Glendale, Kevin Phelps.
Here.
City of Goodyear, Winnette Reed. Maricopa County, Jason Matthews. City of Mesa, Jody Sorrell.
Present.
City of Peoria, Rhonda Humbles.
Present.
City of Phoenix, Mario Paniagua.
Present.
Town of Queen Creek, Heather Wilkie.
Here.
City of Scottsdale, Mark Melanchenko. City of Surprise, Tracy Montgomery.
Here.
She was having, oh, great. And City of Tempe, Rosa Inchausti.
Present.
Chair, we're ready to proceed.
All right, thank you, Pat. For those online, if a committee member would like to ask a question or make a comment during the meeting, please type your comment in the box and it will be read aloud and answered. All meeting attendees, please mute your phone or computer while the meeting is convened. Now on to item number 1, public comment. The public will be provided with an opportunity at this time to address the committee on non-agenda items and all action agenda items for the joint RPTA and Valley Metro Rail meeting agendas. Up to 3 minutes will be provided per speaker unless the chair allows more time at my discretion. A total of 15 minutes for all speakers will be provided. Pat, do we have any public comments?
No, sir.
Okay, now I will move on to agenda item 2, the Chief Executive Officer's report. And I understand that Jessica might have some connection issues, so Alexis will be leading that agenda item today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of TMC RMC. Welcome to today's meeting. I just wanted to present a couple of slides for you on behalf of Jessica. And we will start with the Design a Transit Rep. We generally have this as an annual competition for high schoolers who want to get involved in transit and art. And we are pleased to acknowledge Mr. Jackson Washburn, who is, I believe, a senior at Chaparral High School. His design will be featured on a bus and rail car for the rest of this year. Behind me on the backdrop here are all of the runners up. Obviously, we have very talented individuals who are participating, and we are very excited to see Mr. Washburn's art displayed for the next coming year. Next slide, just a update of what the calendar looks like for the end of this fiscal year. Obviously, we're having our meeting today. The TMC RMC meeting will not happen in July, and then we will reconvene in August 7th. Happy to answer any questions if you have.
Are there any questions for Alexis? Good. Seeing none, on to item number 3, the consent agenda. The consent agenda is presented to action. Are there any questions or comments or items that need to be pulled for separate discussion? Good. Seeing none, I'll request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda items.
I motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item 4, Alexis will introduce this item to authorize continue the purchase of IT hardware and maintenance agreements for fiscal year 2025.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask Phil Oslin, our Chief Information Officer, to come up and present the next 3 items, all related to IT.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'd like to introduce Mr. TJ Thornall, our Manager of IT Service Development. I will not be present in the city during the board meeting, so he will be presenting in my stead, and I've asked him to present to you today as well. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. The first item I would like to talk about is the authorization to continue the purchase of IT hardware and a maintenance agreement for FY25. In this, the purchase and replacement of our networking and storage and end user equipment, the costs have increased by 77%, roughly $800,000. This is caused by the replacement of our end of life primary and secondary storage, which is aging. It's 8 years old. strategic scheduling of purchases that we did do this to reduce some of the hardware costs in FY25 by 50%. Portions of this went to our FY24 and are delayed into FY26 as part of a longer term strategy. Is there any questions with that one?
Are there any questions?
Okay, thank you.
See none.
Next, we'd like to move on to our authorization to continue the purchase of our IT professional services.
Sorry, TJ, we need a motion on
Oh, sorry.
each individual item.
Okay,
please.
I wasn't sure if we want to get through all of them and to take it separately or.
Yep, they'll be, yes, please.
All right, so I will ask for a motion on agenda item 4.
I move for approval of item 4.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. So next, we have the authorization to continue the purchase of our IT professional services for FY 2025. The professional services include our digital ADA accessibility auditing, our audiovisual equipment installation and maintenance, managed printer services, and advanced hardware and support services. For FY 2025, the cost decreased by 16%, about $95,000. And all of our staffing augmentation items previously in this memo are now included in the staffing co-op contract that is going to be presented by procurement.
Are there any questions on this item?
Mr. Chair, I do have a couple questions about these 3 items. I was hoping that we would get through the 3 before we were taking the vote, but I'm fine with the vote as was just presented on item 4. But they're relative to all 3 items, so would now be the best time to ask them.
Yes, please proceed.
So one of the things I was looking at in items 4, 5, and 6 is I was looking back at some prior year agendas. And I appreciate Valley Metro and staff's intent from what I can see and read from the documents to consolidate some of these items so that you have the authorization to move forward with hardware and maintenance as needed, professional services, and then subscriptions and maintenance. What I noticed in particular with this year's series of those 3 items is, for instance, last year in software subscriptions and maintenance, we were providing authorization or recommending to the board to provide authorization for years FY24 through 26. This year's extends from FY25 to 29. The dollar value is significantly greater, obviously with more years, and it seems like there is a larger number from surface read and would appreciate staff's perspective, but it seems like there is a larger volume of vendors and potential solutions between these 3 items that we're seeking this year. I understand and appreciate the desire for flexibility and seeking that opportunity to streamline potentially with having less contracts coming before the TMC and ultimately the board to provide staff the authorization that they need to procure these necessary services. But it does make me a little bit reticent in utilizing this model, or perhaps we should be very selective in how we utilize this model where you're granting the authority to procure any number of contracts with individual vendors. And why I share that is I want to be cognizant and cautious how often we're asking the board to grant that authority. And what particularly caught my eye, again, was the dollar value increasing in several of these and the span of years. So if staff has any insights, perspective you could share as to why we're approaching it this way and when we generally try to utilize this model, that would be helpful.
I'll let Oz answer this one.
Thank you very much for the question. So a couple of things to note regarding this particular model is that this is only for renewals of existing items that the board has authorized previously, or for items that the agency has been using under CEO authorization for a period of time, number of years, that has crossed the threshold for board authorization. Anything net new will come to the subcommittees and the board as a separate memo for consideration. We would not want to include it in this. We would not want to appear to be trying to slip anything by. All of those will be brought separately for individual consideration. The other thing is we have contracts specifically to address the point regarding the years of coverage. We have 3 and 5 year contracts where it makes sense and grants us some sort of savings or other efficiency that come up for different times. So 1 year you may see this, a particular memo only considers the upcoming fiscal year. Other years, there may be a 3 or 5 year period included because one or more contracts is being renewed for multiple years. Hopefully that has addressed the main points of your concern. If there's anything else, I'll be happy to address or any additional questions.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, are there any other questions? All right, seeing none, are we at the point where a motion would be in order? Okay, I'll take a motion on agenda item 5.
Move approval of item 5.
Oh, go ahead.
Mary, did you want to second the motion?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Now we're on item 6.
Okay, the last item that I would like to speak on today is the authorization to continue software subscriptions and maintenance agreements in FY25. The renewal of 26 different tools and software that we use across the agency. There has been a significant increase driven primarily, and we're outlining the main things here, by the Trapeze EAM and Oracle ERP systems together. VMware, which is an infrastructure tool that we've used, has a massive post-acquisition price increase. Partially, we mitigated that by a 3-year agreement. Eleveo, which is a ADA and Fare Collection Center cost increase by with increased utilization. And Tenable.io adds IT security and monitoring for operational technology for the OT side of things. And the last thing was Tableau, which expands our licenses for city staff to have more visibility.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions on this item? All right, seeing none, I'll take a motion on agenda item 6.
Move approval of item 6.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. It was a race the last time. This time everyone was hesitant. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
All right, now I'll ask Alexis to introduce item number 7, Allied Universal Security Services Contract Change Order Wage Rates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 7 is Allied Universal Services Contract Change Order Wage Rates. This has been an item that has been discussed over the last couple of months with board members, primarily on the rail board, in addition to city managers. I'm going to ask Don Schneidmiller to come and present the slides to give you a little bit more context for this item. Don?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. As Alexis mentioned, my name is Don Schneidmiller, and I'm the Valley Metro Transit Security Manager. And this agenda item is us seeking permission to enter into a change order to make an adjustment to our salary structure, our wage rate structure for our employees our staff members on the Allied Universal Security contract. Back in approximately November, we began a very aggressive collaborative effort with Allied as a result of an extensive period of time where we've had vacancies. And so we started working on a series of corrective actions with Allied to see what we could do about reducing those vacancies, particularly in the position of field security officer, the visible frontline security officers, and the first line supervisors. Both of them had significant vacancy rates. Allied very robustly made some changes. They implemented things. I won't get into all of it because the board memo, I think, speaks to the detail, but they got real aggressive financially with recruitment bonuses, retention bonuses. They increased the number of first line supervisors by way of some of the exit interviews. We saw that of those that were on the contract that chose to leave, Some of them identified not just pay was the most significant reason for leaving, but also a lack of first level support, coaching, training. So Allied increased the number of first line supervisors. We took a good look at the training protocol in their academy for new employee orientation, and there's been some adjustments made in the way they go about their training to more of a collaborative, supportive coaching culture to try to keep people there, particularly in the practical exercises that go on. And then they also very recently added what they call an advocate, somebody who's not directly and has not directly been part of this contract, to come in and introduce himself or herself to all of the Allied employees, to be available 24/7 by way of email, hotline, personal cell phone, and to take the temperature and to do an assessment of those not only leaving, but of those who are currently on the contract, to find out why you're here, what do you like, what are we doing right that we can continue to do and expand on, and what are some of the things that aren't so good that we need to improve to maintain a competitive advantage. So we start taking a look at the market. We went to Economic Research Institute out of Irvine and got some good data on what the fair market rates are for this particular position. And that was a little bit challenging because, and I'm familiar with most of the security contracts in the state, this is a challenging one, as it should be. We ask, and you ask appropriately, a lot of our security officers, not just to be visibly present, but to engage with everybody, render first aid. The conditions can be difficult with the heat and the amount of time on your feet. So we have gone from over 50% vacancies in the field security officer position as a result of some of the changes that have been made, down to about 21 or 22%. That's a significant improvement, but we feel like we've hit a wall, and it's going to be very difficult to get below that 21 or 22% rate without taking a hard, real look at us being more competitive in pay, starting pay, improving the quality of the applicant we get, improves the quality of the person we hire, improves the quality of the performance we receive. So if we want to go to the next slide, you can see we're taking a look at what those rates are, what we're proposing. And again, that comes from the Economic Research Institute. Stephanie, is that next slide available?
Just real quick, I do see a question online. Kevin, did you want to wait till the end, or would you like to ask your question now?
At the end, please.
I would only add that in looking at these numbers, and again, these numbers have been put forth to some of the other folks before, we will not need, because we've had significant salary savings up to this point, we will not need an increase in contract authority, assuming, and we know this won't happen immediately on day one, but if these rates go into effect July 1, we expect to have a pretty aggressive approach to filling those remaining vacancies. But assuming they all filled up immediately on the first day, we're not going to come anywhere close to overstepping our contract authority, and we do not anticipate any adjustments to the recently approved FY25 budget. And I'm certainly willing to take questions at this point.
Okay, Kevin?
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, I want to make sure I got the number right. So the report says that we're currently experiencing a 262% turnover rate. Was that a typo, or is that correct?
It's neither. It's that was the data that was, and I provided that, so that's on me. That was the initial information that was provided to me from somebody over at Allied Universal who was new to the account. I dug a little deeper into it. The actual correct amount for April and May is roughly right around 180%. That's still incredibly high, but I'd like to take a second and put that into a little bit of context. They use a formula where they take the average number of people who have left the account each month over a running 12 months. And this is a formula that's common to determine annual turnover. And then they compare that for the given month that the comparison is being done for to the number of people on the account at that time. Here's the important point. When Allied makes an offer to somebody to become an employee and they accept that offer, their system now considers them an employee. So for example, if we were to make you, sir, an offer and you sign on Monday and you start the academy on Friday and you receive a better offer, or you change your mind on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, when you don't show up, that goes into the attrition rate. It also accounts for people who have not yet graduated from the academy. So when you go to the 2-week academy, if somewhere in that process you decide this is not for me, it's not what I thought it was, I'm going to move elsewhere, that also counts as an employee who has left the account. And I think that's an important distinction because I do think it balloons it a little bit.
Okay, great.
That's their
Thank you.
formula.
Great, thanks for that. So the next question I have is regarding what all is included in the, let's take a field section officer, 3384 is the new proposed rate. What benefits, I assume that covers that there's a wage being paid of $24 an hour. Am I correct that our contractor is paying benefits? And if so, can you walk me through generally what type of benefits those are?
I can, sir, but it'll have to be at a high level. I know they offer medical and dental, but like so many plans nowadays, it's probably more fair to describe it as a safety net with rather significant deductibles and whatnot. I can't give you the exact numbers, but they do offer dental, they do offer 401k, they do offer medical, and then also certainly some of the required stuff in terms of FMLA and short-term and long-term disability.
So our contract doesn't specify what we want these employees to receive in the way of benefits.
It does not.
Because I'm trying, and then do the benefits, are they paid only for when the employee reaches a certain number of hours? Or is they prorated then, say, for a part, because I assume some of these positions are part-time and not full-time, is that correct?
Of the 131 field security officer positions, we have 4 of them are part-time and the remainder are full-time. And I don't want to, I can certainly follow up with you on the specifics of that question, but I believe they are eligible for benefits after 30 days. But I can certainly make a note to follow up with you on that. There's not a lengthy delay. And for example, you don't have to work a full year and get off of probation before the benefits kick in,
Right.
if that helps.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I'm asking these questions is that we sometimes say, well, we're losing people because of what we pay. But compensation is made up of a number of different items. And so one, are we, in this particular case, there's almost a $10 per hour management that goes to our vendor for each hour worked. Like we take the 33.84, so let's round up to $34, they're paying 24. We may be losing people because is there an incentive for our vendor to not pay much in the way of benefits to retain more revenue essentially for them internally, and then we're getting penalized by such a significant amount of turnover. So I'm trying to align both the wages. Are we competitive on the wages, but are we also competitive on the benefits? Maybe I'm the only person on this call that has to fight that, but I will say here in Glendale, our employees or our potential employees are asking all the time about not only what's my wages, what are my benefits? So help me. I mean, it sounds to me like it's really up to the discretion of the vendor. And in theory, if they wanted to, if they could find people willing to work for virtually no benefits, it would just be more profitable for them at the end of the day, since they're getting a guaranteed fixed rate per each hour.
So I hear everything you're saying, and I want to be cautious about speaking on what the strategic pricing is for Allied or any other security company. I know that as they respond to requests for proposals and they give us their proposal, that industry is mindful of the benefit packages that each of them offer. They have to be mindful of it in order to be competitive and to try to attract the best employees. What I can say firsthand is that when we take a look at exit interviews and we have conversations with people who are leaving or who are staying, we don't hear concerns about the poor benefits. That's not all encompassing. It's a small sample size, but I would think if that was an issue in terms of being competitive with other agencies, I would hear it. We are hearing that it's a challenging job for the money and that the pay rate appears to be a significant issue. And I hear a little bit about the lack of frontline supervisory support. They want to see more supervisors. They want to feel like they've got more training and coaching. So that's been the emphasis of our increased efforts up to this point. I apologize, I couldn't give you a better answer than that.
No, I appreciate it. I just, again, when I look at and again, I'm not familiar with this exact type of model for hiring security, but it just seemed to me when I looked at there's roughly, the vendor to hire and to manage these people are charging about a 34% markup. And I'm just trying to, is that the right number? And then obviously from that markup, they have to deduct what their actual costs are in the way of benefits. We don't seem to know what those benefits are. So it would seem to me it'd be very hard to know whether or not this vendor is charging a reasonable amount of profit, because we know they're in business to get a profit and we want them to be profitable handling our account. But we really sound like we don't know for sure as an agency exactly how much of that markup is going back into the employee's hand. Because again, the turnover rate, even at the current, say, adjusted rate, we're turning over our workforce every 180 days, roughly. And, part of our security team is not just doing security, but they're our face of our organization. They're the customer service. We want them to develop relationships, develop, kind of an interaction with the community. How can you do that when, every 6 months or, that person is now gone and somebody else is trying to reestablish that relationship? So I think going forward, I just want to get more information. I certainly support us being competitive and needing to make adjustments to reach a certain percentile. But I just don't feel like I have all the information here that I typically would be asking of our team before weighing in and making the decision to increase this amount of the funding. And that concludes my questions.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. I do see Jessica has her hand up. Would you like to respond, Jessica?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Good morning, the committee. Mr. Phelps, we do have this information, but I think we could provide to you is a breakdown of the delta between the wage rate and the bill rate, inclusive of employee benefits. There's also overhead, including management team members assigned to the contract who are not reflected in the table you see here. So outside of frontline supervision and training. So let us take the opportunity to go back and provide that breakdown. I do want to provide some assurance to the committee today that the delta between wage rate and bill rate is certainly is not all profit. It is that overhead. It's that fringe rate that we all have included in our wage rates, which is primarily benefits driven. And I apologize for not joining you. I'm about to board a flight in Cleveland today where I just spoke to American Public Transit Association Rail Conference about our recent openings.
Great, thank you. And I didn't want to suggest that I thought it was all going to profit. I'm just saying I don't know how much of it is going to profit. And if so, of that amount that's going to profit, what seems to be reasonable, especially since the problem we're trying to fix is an incredibly high turnover rate. So I just want to make sure I understand that, because at the end of the day, we're funding a field sectional officer to the tune of gross dollars of about $70,000 per year. And, I just want to make sure that our model, how we do this, and the amount of kind of amount going applied to the company profit seems to be reasonable and fair. And so I'll look forward to getting additional information.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions on this item? Mario?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention how important this is to Phoenix. This has been a really big concern for Phoenix for some time. I think that this is very long overdue in terms of what we're doing. I think that this change brings us from, at least for the security officers, being in the 10th percentile of the market up to 55th percentile of the market. So 10th percentile, I don't know how we're able to hire anybody, particularly for the challenging nature of these positions and what we're asking them to do. But when we look at the light rail system, particularly, we've got an open system, so we rely heavily on our security officers to make sure we're doing the fare enforcement and much more beyond that. They do a lot beyond just the fare enforcement, but that's a key piece of making this system work. And so we've got to have the people in place to do that, and we just haven't been able to get there. Like you said, we hit a wall. You guys
Yes.
made a lot of changes that are not salary related, that have made attempts to retain employees and attract employees in different ways other than salary. And it sounds like those are helping, but they're just not getting us over the hump. And so getting us to the 55th percentile. And my understanding is when you're looking at the comparisons, correct me if I'm wrong, Don, but you're also comparing to jobs, security jobs that are guys behind a desk in a building, sitting in a cool area all day, those kind of jobs as well.
That's a great point. And we hear from people all the time. I'd rather sit in a high rise handing out guest badges and having somebody sign a guest book in air conditioning rather than the expectations we have of people being frontline, forward facing on our light rail system. So you make a great point, but it's a difficult job. We have very high expectations. We're not going to lower those expectations. We just need to reevaluate competitive pay.
Thank you. Yeah, so
Thank you, sir.
I advocate for us to make this change. I think it's super important that this happen and happen quickly. I appreciate the fact that there's not additional funds necessary for the contract, that you can use the savings both in the contract and in the budget to cover the difference. I think that makes a lot of sense. So thank you very much.
I would only add that we don't get billed for the account manager that's assigned to this contract. They eat the cost of that. And then like all security contracts, whenever you have call offs, you need to backfill those shifts so they're not dark shifts and they have to pay their employees overtime. We don't pay that overtime rate. They hit us with just the normal straight hourly rate. So that goes to part of the 35% margin in their markup. And that's pretty industry competitive.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes, Rosa?
Thank you, Chair. Just for some clarity, we had a follow-up conversation with Adrian Reese regarding allied services at the city of Tempe. And if it helps my colleague, Kevin, the rates are pretty comparable to what we're doing in Tempe. And once again, it's not a straight across security. It's looking at the skills and expertise needed for the specific job duties of those platforms and other things that we have in Tempe. So we did our due diligence in looking at those numbers in comparison to Tempe and very comparable. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anybody else?
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions? And with that, I believe, do you have any more of your presentation?
I do not. Thank you, Mr. Paniagua.
Thank you. I will take a motion on agenda item 7.
I motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Are there any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Alexis will then introduce agenda item 8, General Consulting Support Services Contract Award.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have Trevor Cullen coming up, who is our Chief of Capital Development, to introduce the General Contracting Support Services Contract Award and give you some information on that.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. The General Consulting Support Services contract that we utilize sounds really fancy, but I'll kind of break down what we really use it for. It's really professional services, heavy on engineering, architectural, cost estimating. It supports a wide variety of projects, both bus and rail. I have highlighted some past successes and partnerships that we've had. We used this contract to design Peoria Park and Ride. Recently, we opened Avondale Transit Center, if you want to go ahead and advance. We did run through a competitive procurement, so this is a contract award to Arcadis US Incorporated. It would be a 5-year base contract with 3 one-year extension options. Our projection over the initial period is about 15.4 million. That's based on what we know. That's also based on historical rates of what we've utilized this contract for and applying applicable pricing indexes for that time period. This is a picture of City of Buckeyes Park and Ride at Jackrabbit. We did the design on that expansion, and then we're currently doing a HVAC improvement project. So it's a wide variety of engineering, professional services, architectural. And with that, that's the end of this presentation, unless there's any comments or questions.
Are there any comments or questions? All right, seeing none, a motion is in order for item number 8.
Move approval. Item 8.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Alexis, agenda item 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask Michael Matthews, our controller, to make his way to the podium. Number 9 is a multi-temporary staffing services and related solutions competitive contract award. Michael?
Chairman, members of the committee. Before you today for your approval is authorization to enter into a cooperative purchasing agreement with 3 separate agencies for an amount not to exceed $24 million. The length of the contract has to do with the cooperative agreements that we're entering into. When you enter into a cooperative agreement, you gather the same terms. So that's end date is the end date of the last cooperative agreement. The reason for the use of 3 separate contracts is it allows us with the maximum ability to select the appropriate services that we need for the lowest possible cost. All 3 of these agreements are available to all public agencies in Arizona. Can you go to the next slide, Stephanie? A little information, the largest portion of this contract you'll see from the breakdown in the board agenda item is related to our IT spend. We started with our initial spend this year for IT services under the temporary staffing contract. And here we've identified the different changes that are going to happen over time based on our initial projections. Can you go to the next slide, Stephanie? In addition, we've included what historically had not been included in this item, the amount that we're going to use this contract for non-IT purposes. So we started out with what we spent historically during fiscal year 24 and added a 6% inflation number in there to cover things. You know, typically we'll use this to temporarily backfill open positions that are challenging to fill that we need to continue to use to provide services, extend resources on a project basis. So for example, our fare collection project as part of the eligibility services for ADA. And then temporary specialized skill sets that we're just not able to fill that we need to continue to have to provide services, especially on the IT side, it is particularly important. Any questions from the committee?
Are there any questions? Seeing none, I will take a motion on item 9.
Move approval of item 9.
Second.
All right, we had a motion and a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right, Alexis, please introduce agenda item 10, and this item is presented for information only, so no action is required at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, we have been working pretty diligently on drafting our strategic plan. I'm going to ask Jim Hilliard to come up and provide some goal indicators. He's going to walk you through how we're going to measure how we're achieving our goals stated in the strategic plan that has been adopted by the board. Jim?
Thanks, Alexis. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. Thanks for your time today. So as Alexis said, the purpose of this presentation is to get your feedback on the indicators that we propose to use to measure progress toward the 9 goals in our strategic plan. I'll start out with just a little bit of context for the conversation, and then really just turn to the table in the memo to seek your thoughts and feedback. We'll then be bringing, after incorporating those thoughts and feedback, bringing this back to the board in June for their feedback as well, and then moving forward with a regular reporting cycle to the board as outlined in the memo. By way of quick context, as you know, we have 9 goals in our strategic plan. Goals 6 through 9 we really think of as sort of organizational health and effectiveness measures, the basic blocking and tackling of running a large organization. Goals 2 to 5 we see as key means to accomplishing our overarching ends of providing an excellent customer experience that connects communities and enhances lives. So those goals are intended to be implemented. It's sort of a 3-tier structure, and I'd like to talk through this just a little bit because I think it highlights the function, the indicators that you'll give us your thoughts on today serve. So at the very top, we have our goals. These are our broadest and most enduring measures. We anticipate these goals guiding our work for the next 5 years. The indicators are intended to illustrate whether we're moving in the right direction toward those goals. Because they're speaking to sort of very broad organizational objectives for the region, they are necessarily going to be things that both reflect, in many cases, our efforts Like, for example, in the case of boardings or boardings per revenue mile, that's a very important thing for us as a system to know. Are people voting with their feet to use our system? It's absolutely reflective of the work that we do, but we also know it's reflective of the price of gas and things that we don't control. And so they're necessarily broad, but we think it's important to be able to see, are we moving in the direction of accomplishing our goals? At the tier beneath that, we have what our plan terms initiatives. They're really the strategies, the specific things that we will implement over the next 5 years to impact those goals. There are some of those strategies that we know that will continue over the entire 5 years of the plan. So for example, optimizing service performance, we will never stop working on. There are other things that are more distinct efforts, like establishing a customer experience program that we're likely to accomplish in the next couple of years, and then shift our focus to other strategies that we believe impact the goals. So each of those initiatives or strategies will have its own performance measures that are beyond the scope of our conversation today, that we use to measure the impact of that particular strategy, so that we know, have we implemented it successfully, and thereby is it impacting the goal or not? So for example, in optimizing service performance, we might have work toward reducing in-service vehicle failures, because we know that has a direct impact on on-time service delivery, on missed miles, et cetera. It's a measure of the efficiency of our maintenance program that we would include as an initiative, and thereby a strategy to move the needle on our overall rider experience and providing an excellent service. The tier below the strategies are then made up, or initiatives are then made up of specific actions or projects that we will initiate in any given year. And so that's that very bottom tier, and you can see there can be many actions associated with the implementation of a particular strategy. And so what we're looking, and those annual actions will have project plans associated with them that we'll be tracking to know, did we do what we said we were going to do? Did we implement this particular action in pursuit of the strategy to move the needle on the goal? So to give you, so I think one of the keys that we're looking for here is alignment through all three of these levels. So to give you a quick example of what that alignment would look like. So we have a goal of providing an excellent customer experience. One of the strategies that we have proposed for accomplishing that is to innovate and integrate mobility solutions across the region. So the action that we are proposing to take in fiscal year 25 in pursuit of that is to integrate the microtransit services that the West Valley has developed into the Valley Metro app, so that folks are seeing that as a complement to transit, as a first mile, last mile solution, or a solution where we don't have existing fixed route transit, rather than a competing service like an Uber or Lyft. We think that's going to be an important next step in meeting the evolving transportation needs of different areas of our region. So we would have a project plan this year for implementing for integrating microtransit into the Valley Metro trip planning app. We would then measure the use of that through, for example, the use of microtransit through the Valley Metro app, through the use of microtransit for first mile, last mile connectivity, to try to give us a sense of how well is microtransit serving as a component of our broader network. And then we would be looking for that to move the needle on our goal indicators of boardings and I'm sorry, I'm spacing. NPS is net. Thank you very much. Because we'd expect that to be reflected in a better customer experience that results in folks wanting to recommend our service to their friends and neighbors. And so it's that kind of alignment that we're seeking in these three levels, with our conversation today focusing on that broadest level of the indicators that you see on page 2 of your memo. And I don't have a slide for that because it would be too small to read, so I'll just ask you to look to the table on page 2 of your memo. As you look at that, there's probably 4 things that we were trying to achieve in these indicators. The first, obviously, is that it's reflective of progress toward the goal. The second is that they are broad, meaning they incorporate a number of different desired outcomes for our organization. Instead of trying to measure 47,000 things, for example, if we're measuring on-time performance, that's an indication of, did the contractor have the staff to make a pullout? Did the contractor have the management for that pullout to happen on time? Did the contractor have the appropriate maintenance practices so they had the number of vehicles that they needed to make pull out on time, and that those vehicles weren't breaking down en route, causing delayed service, right? So on-time performance is a great sort of top-level metric because it incorporates a whole bunch of different important operational aspects of that contractor's performance. And so if we see it going in the wrong direction, then it's a trigger for us to be drilling down into those sub-measures of why is this happening and what corrective action, do we need to take to get it to go in the right direction. Lastly, or second to last, we were looking for a blend of objective measures, meaning counting things like was performance on time, and subjective measures like as a rider, do you feel we're reliable? The reason we think it's worth measuring both subjective and objective data points is because if those are going in different directions, if we're actually seeing an improvement in on-time performance, an improvement in service delivery, and yet we're not seeing that improvement in Net Promoter Score, then that's telling us there's a misalignment of expectations between us and our riders. And then we need to address that as a communication and expectation issue, independent of the underlying performance. And so we want to be able to have both of those perspectives whenever possible. I think the last thing we were looking for in these indicators was efficiency. We all know there's an opportunity cost associated with counting things and reporting on them. And so wherever possible, we're trying to use measures that we currently use to measure and manage the organization, as opposed to creating something new that has to be created and then managed and measured. And you see that reflected in the table on page 2. Anything that's in italics is a new measure. Anything that's in plain text is something that we already have as an existing measure that we're currently measuring and managing. You'll notice that most of the things in italics tend to be in that subjective category. They tend to be surveys, whether that's surveys of riders, surveys of city staff, surveys of board members, surveys of the public, trying to understand people's subjective perspectives. And because they're surveys, you just can't do them all the time without surveying people to death. And so most of those tend to be annual measures. So while there are a number of things in italics here, most of those we're doing on an annual or a quarterly basis in the effort to try to strike that right balance between having currency of information and not sort of measuring ourselves to death, which then can come at the expense of doing the real work of satisfying customers. So with that kind of overview, I'd be delighted to answer any questions, but mostly I'm really hoping to hear your feedback on the measures you see in the table starting on page 2. We have the gray horizontal bars that reflect the goal that they relate to, and the numbering system is likewise. So everything that's numbered 1 dot something is for goal number 1 of excellent customer experience. You can see there what modes we intend these to apply to, modes being bus, rail, streetcar, paratransit. And for the purposes of this, we're not making a differentiation between streetcar and rail. We're treating streetcar as a form of rail. Where we would get the data, and then the frequency with which we propose to be reporting that information, both internally and to the board and to our city partners. I guess the last thing I'll say is once we have some concurrence on what we should be measuring, then the next step of this will be really drilling into the particular survey design, for example, gathering feedback from folks in our rail project areas or from our city partners, and we'll work that process through our regular board and committee cycle to be getting feedback and doing that development. So with that, I'd sure appreciate your feedback.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Yes. Good. Please proceed, Joe.
Hi, Jim. I have a couple, so I'm just gonna.
Awesome, please.
Can you, I saw the Net Promoter Score and I was trying to figure out how that works for bus rider satisfaction, because that's usually a loyalty issue. And since over 50% of the riders come from zero car households,
Yep.
they're loyal out of necessity rather than choice.
Right.
So how does that figure in?
That's a great question. So one of the reasons I really like Net Promoter is because I think it kind of addresses exactly the point that you're raising, which is when we segment our riders, there are riders who ride by choice and there are riders who ride because it's the only means available to them. The thing I like about Net Promoter, and for anybody who's not as familiar with that measure, it asks the question, what is your likelihood to recommend Valley Metro or recommend Apple Computer or whatever, right? To recommend this service to others. And then that comes on a very extremely likely as your top category. And then not likely or extremely unlikely. And it sort of takes the not likely and extremely unlikely and it subtracts them from the very likely. So essentially what you're getting is a gauge of folks who are enthusiastic supporters of what you do. And so that's why I think Net Promoter is a good measure for this, because unlike whether they ride or not, because they might not have a choice, I may ride, but if I'm doing it with gritted teeth because you make me late all the time and the bus is stinky, I'm unlikely to recommend it to others because you make me late all the time and the bus is stinky. It'll really be those who are really happy with our services and feel like they're out there to say, you should give Valley Metro a try. Like that's a great measure of the buy-in and the loyalty that we're building, as opposed to, I just don't have another option. So that's why we've settled on that. If there are thoughts on other ways we could go about gauging that, we're certainly not married to anything that's on this page.
I was just curious. And then when you talk about the writers survey, who's getting that writer survey?
So as you know, Jody, we've been doing a writer survey about every second or third year, way back into the mists of time. Exactly, the West Group Intercept Survey. We think that the depth of that data is really useful, despite the fact that it takes real time and effort to do. So we would propose here continuing to do that, to in fact start doing it on an annual basis, but maybe with a smaller sample size.
So there's no, I guess I'm concerned that there's no rider feedback you're getting from paratransit or ride choice, which are two very important services, but this seems to be focusing on bus and rail.
Completely agree. And in fact, that's why you see under the mode they're all, we would expand that to include paratransit, ride choice. And I think also with the concurrence of our partner cities in the West Valley, with the microtransit that they're doing, that we really want to have a real understanding of what that rider experience is across all modes. So perfect point.
And then can you, how do you define frontline staff engagement?
That's an excellent point. So you'll see in here that we use two different terminologies. We'll say VM staff in many cases and workers or frontline staff. And the distinction that we're drawing there is VM staff is just what it sounds like, people that are paid by Valley Metro, people that get a Valley Metro check. We think that there's a number of these areas where a broader pulse is important. And so where we're saying workers or frontline staff, that would include allied security guards, it would include ACI operators, it would include Keolis operators. And so we want, for a number of these, we want to be able to survey or get information from that broader reach. Now, specifically to engagements, so Hillary's team has already put together and will be expanding a whole different range of ways that we're trying to connect and communicate with those folks who are serving customers in our name, whether they happen to be Valley Metro employees or a contractor employee. And so one form of engagements that Mike's already been engaged in is going around and doing regular forums where operators for Keolis, for example, are brought together and Mike sits down with them and says, hey, here's what's going on with Valley Metro that impacts you, and what do you need me to hear? And the same thing with ACI and the same thing with Allied. We're also looking to do things like develop specific sort of other newsletters or social media channels like podcasts for those groups, because we want them to understand where we're trying to go and not always have that filtered through their management.
So is that engagement internal, or is more internal than it is external?
In the case of those broader frontline workers, it's actually probably more external in the sense that you're talking about contractors that aren't Valley Metro employees. So if that's what we mean by external.
I'm talking about public.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean internal to the Valley Metro brand family. Yeah.
Okay. Then under operational excellence, when you talk about completed trips, you talk about rail and bus. Again, why isn't paratransit included in that?
Oh, that's a good point. To my knowledge, that's a good point, and we'll include them. To my knowledge, missed trips for paratransit hasn't typically been a huge issue. They're late, but they often don't totally no-show, but we should include them. You're absolutely right.
I guess my concern is when I look at this, when you're calling out specific services, it always seems to be bus and rail, and paratransit is a vital service and needs to be wrapped into that. And ride choice, however that works out, but those, I'm very sensitive to not excluding those services.
Absolutely. Point well taken.
And then this might be a separate conversation, but 5C where you talk, it's the percentage of city staff who agree that my city has a voice in service and system planning. I guess I'm curious how you define that, since I'm not going to speak for every city, but many cities do their own kind of service planning and come to Valley Metro. So I would say those cities already have a strong voice. So I don't know, I guess that one is a little how that works. I'm not being argumentative. I'm just trying to figure out how that is defined and would be measured.
No, I think that's an excellent point. And that's a prime example, I think, of one where what we really need to be able to do is to sit down with RTAG or some subset of RTAG and say, hey, we want to have a meaningful measure of how you guys feel about your engagement with us around planning and policy, and staffing policy decisions. How can we ask that question? And if there's a better way to ask it, that's absolutely what we'll do.
I just wanted, we just came off of our own Mesa Stat performance metrics. So I'm like in the, what do you mean by, how do you define this?
I also really appreciate the point that you raised to me earlier about don't measure yourself to death. And I hope you're kind of seeing that.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Jody. I saw Rosa next and then Mario.
Thank you, Chair Peters. Thank you, Jim, I know strategic planning is very difficult, right? Especially with an organization that serves this entire region. I appreciate the effort to try to capture not just the hard data, but what I call sentiment data. Because I always say, even if crime is low and your ridership feels unsafe, then that's a valid point for all of us to know. The one thing I had questions about is your overall goals, and maybe you can help clarify. So customer service, the goal isn't defined as what's the benchmark by which we want to aspire to. It just says customer experience and then the metrics or the outputs, that you have under there. Is there plans to identify a benchmark that says we want to be the best in the nation as far as customer service, or the safest ridership in the Southwest, or whatever it is like that? Can you help clarify?
Yes, that's an excellent point. The answer to that is yes in every case. The next layer down is where we're using existing data. Then I think our very next immediate step is to begin identifying what's the target that we're aspiring to, and what sort of incremental movement are we looking for vis-a-vis the strategies, the initiatives that have been identified to achieve that. And so for things like complaints and net promoter and boardings and on-time performance and all of those things that are existing parts of how we understand and manage our business, I think we're well positioned to do that. And then we would be coming back to you and to the board with here's what we think is a appropriate objective in those areas. Where we're developing new measures, which is again primarily in that sentiment area, we kind of think we need to first work together on the development of the tool, then go out and get a baseline, and then come back and say, based on this baseline and based upon what we see from peer organizations and others that do similar things, here's what we think is appropriate. So I think we'll probably actually hit twice on those, sooner for the things that we already do and already understand, and a little bit later after we've done the survey design and collected the data to say, this is our jumping off point, and here's where we want to be 2 years from now or 5 years from now.
And something for consideration, Jim.
Please.
I think it's always great to start aspirationally, like where do we want to be? Think high level, because then your metrics by which you measure that might change, if that makes sense. Like for us, I'll give you an example. Advanced life support for our fire department. We benchmarked against the Heart Association we know that it's 6 minutes or less for tissue preservation. And that's just one of them. And I keep thinking you start there and then you might identify different metrics. And we've identified things that we want to, measurements before we've identified where we want to be. So it might change what we choose to measure, just for consideration.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Thank you.
Okay, Mario?
Yeah, just real quick, great questions and great points brought up by Jody and Rosa. I just wanted to kind of go back to the one that Jody brought up earlier related to the percent of city staff who agree with service planning. Are you open to maybe having 2 or 3 measures related to the city stakeholders? Because I think maybe touching on some other areas like customer service and financial sustainability and
Yes,
those things would be.
absolutely. In fact, kind of what we were thinking both for that question, and you'll notice there's some board questions in here, is what we thought was that we would develop a little broader instrument. We don't want to burden anybody with some massive survey, but a little broader instrument that touched on a number of different areas that would help us, that would provide exactly the kind of feedback that you're describing, that there might be only one or two of those that actually rolled up to the goal indicator at that highest level, because we didn't want to give the board a list of 47 things, but that having data beneath that. So if there's a top line measure of how the cities feel about working with Valley Metro, that goes to the board. And then we have specific measures of how is customer service? How do you feel about, the way that we do public outreach? How do you feel about the kind of staffing that you get around board agenda items and the dialogue that goes on there, to have some more detailed questions that we used internally and in consult with you to understand the why of that top line measure so we can move it in the right direction.
Great. Thank you, Jim.
I just have a question related to how do you consider incorporating non-transit rider feedback to see if there's opportunities to invite them to the system beyond just who's sharing with their neighbors and friends?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a tricky one. And I'll just tell you, you'll notice that that's the one where we have sort of TBD on the chart. And so we're looking into a couple of different tools right now, but quite honestly, until that assessment is further along, I can only tell you what we're investigating, not where I think we're going to land. So for example, there's a company that we've had a little bit of exposure to back when Prop 105 was on the Phoenix ballot, that measures sentiment via social media more broadly. And so they're looking at engagements, and they're looking at both engagements with you, but engagements about you through other nodes across a whole range of different platforms to try to get a sense of what's the zeitgeist around a particular topic. And so that's one that we're actually meeting with later this week to try to understand, could that possibly play a role in this? Because you're right, you could do a broader survey exactly the way that Guidehouse did. And that may need to be a part of it too. But we want to come back with some thoughtful proposals on how to do that. It's just not something we've ever done before.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from folks online? I'm not seeing anything else from those in attendance. Okay, with that, again, this was for information only. Thank you, Jim.
Appreciate it.
Comprehensive. I appreciate your efforts on this. All right, item number 11. Are there any questions on this informational item on travel and expenditures? No action. And 12, same thing with future events and current events and suggested future agenda items. Any from the committee? Okay, the next meeting of the TMC RMC is scheduled for Wednesday, August 7th at 11 a.m. This meeting is adjourned. Now we're going to move into the Transit Management Committee. Consent agenda. Are there any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Anything need to be pulled? Yeah, I see a note here, Alexis. The minutes will be updated. The change for the May agenda item on Valley Metro RPTA fiscal year 25 proposed operating capital budget to reflect that Rosa and Chadi made the motion and Kevin made the second. I'll request a motion on the consent agenda items 1A through 1D.
Between us three, so I motioned.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Agenda item 2, I will ask Alexis to introduce the West Valley Fixed Route Bus Service Contract Change Order.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask Tom Young, our Deputy Chief for Bus and Paratransit, to provide an overview on this item of the West Valley Fixed Route Bus Service Contract Change Order. Tom.
Thank you, Alexis. Chair Peters, members of the committee. I'm here today to present on the West Valley Fixed Route Bus Service Contract Change Order. The change order is to actually request extension of the current contract with National Express. The current base year of the contract expires June 30th of this year. It has two extensions available. One's a 3-year option, the other's a 2-year option. We're asking to enter into the 3-year option at this time to afford us time to actually re-procure this services with the joint procurement that we canceled a few months ago. The contract does include a termination clause for convenience, and we have had the conversation with the provider that our intent is to take the 3-year option. However, we're going to continue to get the procurement on the street to hopefully award by March of next year to move to a go live October 1. The extension itself for the current year includes about a 1.5% increase on what we're currently reimbursing the contractor. Our current reimbursement is 100% based off of revenue miles. We want to move to a fixed variable cost rate. For the full 3-year pricing, which we did get, if we moved into the second year, it's about a 4.3% increase and a 7.1% next year. So the total contract extension is $12.3 million. However, once again, our intention is to extend the contract to afford us the time to go through the procurement process over the next 12 months. I can answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions on this item? Okay, seeing none, I will take a motion on agenda item 2.
Motion?
Is that Harold?
Yes.
In a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right, Alexis, please introduce agenda 3, sublease agreement with Total Transit Enterprises.
Great. Thank you for staying up there, Tom. Tom will go through the sublease agreement with Total Transit Enterprises. Tom?
Yes, thank you again, Alexis. This item here is for Valley Metro to enter into a sublease with Total Transit for the West Valley facility that they currently operate out of. Total Transit currently has this facility leased for the next 10 years. One of the issues that we have run into with the procurement of the West Valley service is real estate is not optimal on the West Valley, number one, and number two, it is not cost effective at this time. The last procurement did produce a couple different properties. However, the cost of those properties were much higher than what this facility is. And it took a lot of investment to get it up to where a transit operation could actually be run from this. So Total Transit is agreeable to subleasing the current facility so that as we re-procure the services, we can make the facility available for any prospective proposer that's coming in to bid on the contract when the RFP is on the street.
All right, are there any questions on this item? Seeing none, a motion is in order for agenda item 3. Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item number 4, current events and suggested future agenda items. Are there any? All right, seeing none, the next meeting is Wednesday, August 7th at 11 a.m. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so we will convene the meeting of the Rail Management Committee now to the June meeting. And the first item on the agenda is the consent agenda for items 1A through 1D. Are there any questions or any items that need to be pulled for separate discussion? Hearing none, I'd like to request a motion for items 1A through 1D on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. It takes us to item 2. So I'll turn it over to Alexis to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask Trevor Cullen, our Chief of Capital Development, to come and present on the West Valley High Capacity Transit Alternative Analysis, our locally preferred alternative for the West Phoenix project.
Thank you, Alexis. Chair, members of the committee. Our study area for the West Phoenix High Capacity Transit Alternatives Analysis is generally bound by Camelback Road on the north, McDowell on the south, 99th Avenue on the west, and then Central Avenue. On this map, I will just point out for reference, the existing light rail line is the purple line on the far right with white bullets there, or dots that indicate our station locations. Another thing I'll point out is the blue line kind of in the middle. That is a future BRT corridor, the Phoenix's 35th Avenue BRT corridor for perspective. And then the red dashed line would be our future 10 West. So in theory, when we're building this project into the future, that the 10 West connection will be there. So you see quite a multimodal connections there in this study area. Through this process, we had quite an extensive public outreach effort, which included 15 public meetings, about a year of outreach from March of 23 through March of this year, 10 in-person, 5 virtual meetings. We had great attendance and over 900 comment forms. So it was a really good process. What we've arrived at is a locally preferred alternative that's shown in green there in the map, and that's generally along Indian School Corridor. Also, when we do an LPA, we actually identify the mode, and the mode that's identified here and recommended is light rail. On the dashed green portions of the lines, those are 2 connection options, and that's based on that community feedback. They asked us to keep 2 connections options into the existing light rail. In the future, we are not proposing both connections. We would when we get closer to project implementation, we would engage with the community again and ultimately make that connection decision. That's about the extent of what I have. If there's any questions or comments on this action.
Any questions or comments from members of the committee? All right, I do have some comments just to say how excited we are to move this forward in Phoenix. This extends light rail out into our Maryvale area, a very underserved area of our community, and has been for a long time. I will say, however, this line is a ways away. We're probably nearly 20 years from seeing this one open, but it's still satisfying to see this placed on the map and begin planning for this. Focused on getting the I-10 West constructed and done, along with our BRT on 35th Avenue, and then we'll be focused on this one. So just want to advocate for everyone's support on this, because we're very excited to go out into the West Valley with this project. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I did fail to mention that this was approved by City of Phoenix Council last week, and it will be going through the MAG approval process in August. So sorry I missed that slide, but thank you, Mario.
Thank you. All right, I get a motion on this.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Jody.
I second.
And a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all. Passes unanimously. Item 3 is report on current events and suggest future items. Any requests? Committee? All right, we're off for July. See everybody in August. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.